Learning Moed Katan Daf Dalid. We left off on Daf Dalid Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud, quickly recapping that we learned that the Rabban Gamliel and his Beis Din, they took a vote regarding the prior takana of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, or the Batei Dinim of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, that said that the concept of Toisefes Shmita, which means that we add to the prohibition of the 7th year, there are certain activities that we already must abstain from already in the 6th year, with the details that we learned, whether it's a stay lavan, that we may not plow the land already from Pesach of the 6th year, from a stay ilan in an orchard, you may not plow the land already from Shavuos of the 6th year. So they went ahead and they nullified that decree. And the question was, first of all, Bachlal, there's a rule that a Beis Din cannot outvote or overrule a prior Beis Din's takana unless they are greater from the prior one with wisdom and a number. And the premise of this question is that as great as Rabban Gamliel is, but he is not as great as and not greater than the Batei Dinim of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But most importantly, the Gemara asked that we know that the concept of Tosefes Shvis is either a halacha l'Moshe Missinai, or according to Rabbi Akiva, is a pasuk. So if it's prohibited biblically, or the way we worded it is, let's make it into different stages. If since we know it's prohibited by scripture or / by halacha l'Moshe Missinai, therefore let's say that prohibition went back until that there's a pasuk and there's halacha l'Moshe Missinai. So let's go with Rabbi Akiva. The pasuk prohibits for 30 days. So the halacha l'Moshe Missinai must add to the prohibition of the pasuk. So the halacha l'Moshe Missinai must have added that you may not even work the land, plow the land, not only 30 days before, from Pesach or from Shavuos. If that is a halacha l'Moshe Missinai, then how can Rabban Gamliel nullify the takana of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, even if we were to say that when they made their decree from the outset, they allowed this decree to be overturned? But that's only a rabbinic decree, and it's prohibited l'chu'ura on the biblical level. That's the issue that we left off with. We're going to conclude, and we're going to have various approaches to this understanding that indeed Rabban Gamliel and his Beis Din did nullify to a certain degree the concept of Tosefes Shmita, and Daf Dalid will primarily deal with the laws of Chol HaMoed. And as we learned in the Mishnah, that from the 5 heterim that allows people to work on Chol HaMoed, first one that we are learning about is called Davar Ha'aved. If you're going to have a principal loss, there's going to be a financial loss of principal. On the other hand, that heter is countered if the work that you are doing is considered halachically excessive exertion. Words are tircha yisera, and we're going to have pashat a lot of different scenarios, cases where you are allowed to water your field on Chol HaMoed, not called tircha yisera, versus other cases which will basically paint a greater clarity in the halachic definition of tircha yisera. We're going to also mention a little bit, the Mishnah says that regarding the digging of a new irrigation canal known as a amma. The Mishnah spoke about doing that on Chol HaMoed, digging the canal on Shemitah. Problem is that the Mishnah that prohibited digging this new canal on Shemitah, there is no issue with tircha yisera. Unlike Chol HaMoed, tircha yisera is a problem. By Shemitah, no one holds that there's a problem with tircha yisera. So the Gemara will clarify that the issues with digging a new irrigation canal on the 7th year, on the Shemitah year, is either a problem rabbinically, because it looks like you are hoeing, that's called nira ka'oider, or because it machshir agapeha lizriya, because when you dig a canal, where do you put the earth that you dig out of this canal? You put it on the sides of the canal, on the banks of the canal. That earth now is mamash ready for it to be planted. It's almost like plowing, because that earth is very soft. Even though your kavana b'chlal was not to plow the banks of the canal, but there's a concept called psikresha. And even l'Rab Shimon, that davar she'ein eschavin is permitted, but if certainly something will happen, it's as if you had that kavana, and that will be the two optional, the two approaches why we may not dig a new irrigation canal on the Shemitah year. We're going to learn about repairing a damaged irrigation canal during Chol HaMoed and much, much more. Now, Chavre, before we begin today's daf, I would like to quickly go back to Daf Gimel Amud Beis and read 2 lines in Tosfos in the bottom of the Amud. And this is really connected to the flow of our sugya. In Parshas Kisisa, the pasuk writes, "Sheishes yomim tavoid ubayoyim hashvi'i tishbois." That opening of the pasuk clearly is speaking about Shabbos. The same verse continues, "Bechodesh ubekatzer tishbois," that you should rest from charisha, from plowing, and from katzir, and from harvesting, and from reaping. Machloikis, like we are learning between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, what is the ending of the verse referring to? Rabbi Akiva says it's referring to Tosefes Shvi'is, and Rabbi Yishmael holds that it's giving you a heter that what type of plowing and reaping is prohibited on Shabbos only if it's not mitzvah related. And that line actually is teaching you that there is one time that harvesting is a mitzvah, and that's the harvesting of the barley the night prior to bringing the Korban Omer, that even if that is Friday night, you break the Shabbos, you harvest because it was never included in the biblical prohibition of tzira, of reaping. So what's underlying the Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, that's very important. Tosfos gives an insight. Both agree that if you want to understand the meaning of a verse, you have to look at its context. Both agree to that. However, let's read inside, second to last line in Tosfos, that Rabbi Akiva savar, that this cannot be referring to Shabbos. Why can it not be referring to Shabbos? Tosfos says beautiful, because the mashmois, the pasuk is speaking about that which you may not do. What's resting means don't work. According to Rabbi Yishmael, Becharesh ubakotzer tishbois is not telling you a chumrah, that which you may not do. It's actually trying to infer a kula, that you are allowed to do the tzir of the omer. So if the pasuk is telling the context is about prohibitions, thou shalt not work, or rest, doesn't make sense to understand a part of the verse coming to tell you the opposite of a chumrah, telling you a leniency. That's the type of context that we use. Rabbi Yishmael says pashut. The pasuk is speaking about the date of Shabbos. The pasuk begins Sheishes Yomim Tavoy Uvayoyim Hashvi Tishbois. So if the pasuk is the context is Shabbos, don't tell me the verse is speaking about Shemitah. In other words, they both subscribe that you have to look at the context to give a insight as to what this part of the pasuk is referring to. Are you looking at the date, or are you looking about the direction? Is the pasuk telling you a chumrah? Which it is, so therefore it doesn't make sense that the seif of the pasuk is telling you a kula. Anyways, that's a beautiful Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Daf Daled Amud Aleph. We left off 4 lines before the top of the Amud. And again, since we see that Rabbi Akiva, the prohibition of plowing of Charish prior to Shemitah, Tosefes Shemitah, is a kra. Everyone holds it's also a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So that must mean that the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is not only 30 days prior, that's prohibited mikra, but really from Pesach and Shavuos, that is the additional halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So don't tell me that the Beis Din of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai allowed for this takana to be nullified, even if they did so. It's not theirs to allow. It's prohibited halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So Elo Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. No, ki gibiri ilchasa. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai is what we call eser netiyos. Eser netiyos actually is a leniency that if you have 10 saplings, yaldo means young trees, if they were planted within a certain close proximity, within a beisah, being that if you will not plow it, those saplings will die. So the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is telling you that you are allowed to make the exception by the eser netiyos. The pasuk, Rabbi Akiva, is coming to prohibit it, old trees, mature trees. The beauty about this will mean that both the halacha and the pasuk is only referring to Tosefes Shemitah 30 days prior. Only 30 days prior. Going back to Pesach, going back to Shavuos, that's only midrabanan. Now we go back to the original answer. That's only yasser from that is an added Tosefes from the Beis Din of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, who said lachatchila, they made this stipulation that if a latter Beis Din would like, they can nullify it. And indeed, Rabbi Gamliel nullified it. The Gemara says that you can't say that because if the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which is true, is l'mishra yalda, Hashem would not have to write a verse prohibiting mature trees because we would have automatically extrapolated from the fact that God in halacha l'Moshe Sinai needed to give a heter for the 10 saplings is lav memela zekena asira. And therefore, l'Rab Akiva, the pasuk would not have written becharish ubekatzer tishbais. I can't underline how important these few lines of the Gemara is. If you want to understand better, what is the halacha l'Moshe Sinai? What is the relationship between halacha l'Moshe Sinai and psukim? This is a very yesodistic line. It's since we know an isur indirectly from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, Hashem would not have written it in the pasuk. So therefore, we're back to the question. Elo, another approach. Hilchaseh l'Rabbi Shmuel, Kroi l'Rabbi Akiva. Okay? And both of them only go back 30 days. That's this approach. It's not one or the other. Either it's also 30 days from the pasuk, or it's also 30 days l'Rabbi Yishmael, which will mean, according to that there is a machloikis tanoim whether eser netiyos is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's another big chiddush. Normally the rule is we don't have arguments in a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But what we accomplish now is that since the pasuk or the halacha is only 30 days, that remained, but the Beis Din of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel added the Isur all the way back to Pesach or to Shavuos. And it is that additional Rabbanon which Rabbi Gamliel nullified. Another approach. Every approach is a huge chiddush. Rabbi Yochanan says, how people understand this Gemara, we have to spend a lot of time. That Omar Rabban Gamliel uBeis Dinoi midoiraisa batalahu. You're right. That the Isur of plowing from Pesach and Shavuos is mido oiraisa, and Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Gamliel's Beis Din had the power to nullify. Wow! Not only are they nullifying a takana from Beis Din and Beis Shammai, no, they're nullifying a doiraisa. Who gives Rabbi Gamliel a power to outrule a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that goes all the way back to Pesach and to Shavuos? Why? How can he nullify a halacha? Because he had a Gzeira Shava. My Tama, because Rabbi Gamliel learned Shabbos, Bereshis, Malahalan, just like when it comes to Shabbos. Only the day of Shabbos itself is prohibited. But Lifaneo Ula Achareo Mutarin. But Shabbos doesn't carry forward, which is a big statement. Afkan, so based on the Gzeira Shava, came along Rabbi Gamliel and he says, only the year of Shemitah is a year in which you may not work the land, but lefnei lachanel mutar. First of all, Chavre, we learned together in Masechtas Yuma that Tosefes Shabbos is mido eiraisa. We mentioned this yesterday. Like I said, even if a person doesn't keep the 18 minutes, which we the men should, but after 18 minutes from Lich mentioned Shabbos, be'emes, it's not Shabbos yet. We really add. There is Tosefes Shabbos. So Tosefes makes, the second Tosefes says the following, that when we learn in Yuma that there's a concept of adding to the Shabbos biblically that only goes to a few minutes prior and a few minutes post. And Eina Chanami, that is something, even based on the Havamina, that we can use a Gzeira Shava to undo a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. We're not taking away.
Is that before nightfall? 3 minutes?
That's before nightfall, Baruch, yeah.
Thank you.
But what we're saying here is that we had this concept of you may not even plow the land from 6 months before Shemitah. That is what the Gzeira Shava takes out. Such a large period of time is something in which Tosefes cannot include. But Herter, that there's a Havamina to say that Rabbi Gamliel came with the Gzeira Shava. For thousands of years, we had the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and he used the Gzeira Shava to undo the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or according to Rabbi Akiva, to undo a pasuk. So the Gemara says,
"What does that actually mean, Rabbi?
Huh?
Does that mean that? What does that mean? There was no halacha Moshe Sinai?
Danny?
What does it mean?
Danny, it's very difficult. Let me say this: these few lines is very insightful to the understanding of halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This time it clarified that this is not what the halacha l'Moshe Sinai meant, which is still a very big novelty. It doesn't work that way. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai means is that which is passed down orally, that never changes. Again, we have a rule, there aren't any arguments in a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The first answer of the Gemara is also problematic. When we're saying that there's really Esed Netiyas is a Machloikas Tanoim, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva, whether it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, we don't find this anywhere else. I'll tell you more than that. No one is allowed to make up a Gzeira Shava. What do you mean Gzeira Shava? He made up a Gzeira Shava. The Gemara is going to challenge all that. Maska, that I'm just pointing out the fact that there's such a Havamina. That's very, very insightful. Maska V'Laravashi can be. Manda Amel Ilchasa, whoever holds that Toisef Shemitah is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Esenetias, but Asya Gzeira Shava and Akra Hilchasa, no way can a Gzeira Shava uproot it. And Rashi adds the word, since we know that Ein Adam done Gzeira Shava Ma'atzmai, so what do you mean? Rabbi Gamliel must have heard it. If he heard it from his teacher, or heard it from his teacher, then there never would have been such a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There is no such a thing. And even if it's a pasuk, same problem. Umanda Amar Kra, Asya Gzeira Shava and Akra Kra cannot be. So this answer is refuted. El Amar Ravashi, Rabbi Gamliel lo beis din Isavru Rabbi Shmuel, that holds that Hilchas Gemirah. Now, what was our problem? Our problem is that the halacha, how can you uproot halacha l'Moshe Sinai? So the answer is that when was there the halacha l'Moshe Sinai? Right, like we learned yesterday, Esenetiyos and Arava and Nisuch Hamayim is from God. That's only Bisman Shabeis HaMikdash Kayim. And it actually makes sense because since these three halachas were taught together, the third one is the halacha regarding pouring water on the altar during the holiday of Sukkot, which is only connected to it's a temple-bound halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Aval bisman she'ein beis hamikdash kayam loy. There is no halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What was there then? There was a derabanan from Beis Din, from Hillel and Shammai. Or we can say even better. That when there was a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, the halacha was only 30 days. On that came along Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and they added all the way back to Pesach. Rabbi Gamliel didn't have to really nullify. He notified the people. Chevre, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel's rabbinic addition was because there was a biblical problem. Now that there's no longer a Beis Hamikdash, the moment the biblical collapses, automatically the rabbinic collapses. That also resolves the problem. How can a latter Beis Din nullify a prior Beis Din? He didn't actually nullify. He revealed that the whole problem, the whole reason why we have a rabbinic is only to create a fence around the biblical. If there's no longer biblical, automatically there's no rabbinic. Okay, we'll stop over here, Chavra.
Is that because the Shemitah after Beis Hamikdash was D'Rabbanan B'chlal? Like
not so. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai was only B'zman Beis Hamikdash Kayim. Not related to what we learned 2 days ago. This Machlokes Rebbe in the Chachamim on Daf Beis Amud Beis, whether Shemitah. Not related to that. Simply by the fact that why did God teach these three halachas together? Esenetiyos, Arava also is Beis Hamikdash, and Nisach Hamayim. They put it together. Okay, Chavra, we're coming back to the laws of Chol Hamoed. It's a very easy daf. It's almost like when these words, Davar Ha'aved, Heter. How do you define Davar Ha'aved? At least we get this general concept. Davar Ha'aved means if you're going to lose the principal. How much principal? I'm just curious. What if you're going to lose $2? Can you go to work? Nothing is that clear. And most importantly, Tircha Yisera. So at least with today's daf, we're going to get a little bit more clarity from many, many cases. It's just a very practical, can you do this? Can you, that's already called a lot of work. No, that's okay. That's not a lot of work. So we're going to define the meaning of Tircha Yisera. There's also going to be a lot of halachas based on human psychology, because there are certain things that you may not do because you might end up doing excessive work. Will you end up doing excessive work? How do people react? And halacha will follow the majority of time. So it's going to be a very practical daf all the way to the end. So 2 dots. Says the Mishnah, right? Avoloi mimei hagshamim, nor from mei kiloin. So if you have a beis hashalchem, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about an irrigated field. We're talking about a field that was humanly irrigated before Yom Tiv, which means the produce already began to germinate. It's starting to grow. If it will not get watered on Chol HaMoed, whatever began to grow will get ruined, will dry out. That's a financial principle loss. Okay, said the Mishnah, so even though that's the heter of Davar Ha'aved, but you may not water it from a gathering of rainwater, nor from a gathering of a well water. Now, I understand why may you not water it from well water, because how do you get the water out of the well? The well is deep. You have to put a pail in, right? You have to schlep the bucket up. That's called Tirchei Yisera, schlepping up a bucket. Problem is with rainwater, if the pool of rainwater is near the field, it's not deep. It's just a little puddle. Sometimes you can just with your leg, you can make like this indentation in the ground and it can direct the water from the puddle inside your field. That's not Tirchei Yisera. That's going to be the issue. So Beishlema make kiloin that we are not allowed to water even a Beis HaShalchem, even though there's going to be a Davar Ha'aved from well water, because there's Tirchei Yisera, because the water in the well is deep. So schlepping the pail up, that is called Tirchei Yisera. Ela make shama my Tirchei Ikam. Practical question. Again, obviously, guys, if it rained a mile away, but that's not what the Mishnah means. The Mishnah did not differentiate. No matter where, even if the rainwater is right near the field, right outside the alley of the shul, or right inside the Sephardic shul, there's rainwater gathered. It's near. So there's you don't need a pail. It's on the floor. So Amar Rabbi Lo, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Answer number one is you're right, but Gzeira make shamim otu make kiloin. If we would be allowed to water the Beis HaShalchem from rainwater, people would then end up schlepping it from a well. I want to point out, if you remember in the introduction, we spoke out that there's a big machlokes rishonim. What is the level of the prohibition of working on Chol HaMoed? Now, if it's a biblical prohibition, then it makes sense for the Chachamim to make gezeiros, just to point out the problem. According to the many Rishonim that say that working on Chol HaMoed is asur midrabanan, even if there's so then this sounds like gzeira ligzeira. Oh, it's okay. If you're going to get rainwater, you're going to end up taking well water, and if you took the well water, if it's only a rabbinic, then normally we would not make such a type of we don't make a fence around the fence. So the many Rishonim that say that it's only midrabanan, they deal with this Gemara. Like they have the gzeira, there's certain approaches how to justify it. Right. Rav Ashi has another approach. And he says that no, not because this will lead to that. In other words, when you have rainwater, see, it depends where you lived. So they're very practical. Here in LA, it barely rains. So when you think about a rain puddle, it's never very deep. But think South America, think Florida. There it rains, plachas. And what happens is you have a pool of rainwater that the first gathering of the water doesn't demand a pail because it's on the surface. But if it's a lot, you'll take once, you'll take twice, you'll take thrice. There'll come a point where the pool of rainwater also has a stomach, it has a depth, and you will end up schlepping it out with a pail. And that's the cutoff line. Not because you will take it from a well. Even rainwater can bring about the Tirchei Yisera when you start schlepping it out from the deeper part of the pool of gathered rainwater. Okay. Says the Gemara, similarly, this is connected to whether you agree with the din of Rab Zera. He had a big chiddush. Streams that draw water from ponds containing rainwater. It's the Mishnah basically is telling you don't water your field from rainwater. Shmuel makes a big exception that if you have a stream that is constantly being fed by ponds which are being fed from rainwaters, says Rab Zayd on the name muter lahashkois mehen b'choilo shalmoid. You can take. Now, guys, understand something. A stream of water that's constantly being fed will have enough water in which you won't have to take a bucket because you're not emptying it out, that now you have to go deeper into it. But if we subscribe to a concept, don't use rainwater, because if you will use rainwater, you might end up using well water, then this would be prohibited. Even though this body of water will never demand for you to use a pail or a bucket, but you might use it from another body of water. So whether we agree to this heted, the first white line, Mad Isleil Rav Zera, which is Ravashi, okay, but Ravashi doesn't subscribe to a Gezerah. The only reason why you may not take water from a pool of rainwater is because you might end up using a bucket. But when we know you will never need a bucket, because the rainwater is constantly being fed, so when you take off the top, it fills up again to the top, then you are allowed to do it. Umar the first answer, who's the first answer? Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree with Rav Zera. Even if you have a stream in which you will never need a pail, but you may not use that water, because if you'll use it from that, then you might end up using it from a well where you will need a bucket. You know, it's how far do we have to distance ourselves from the potential tircha yisera? Weiter. Go for we learned above. And you have a stream. Yeah, Dan, it's simple. You have a stream. It's constantly being fed with new rainwaters. All right. Now, how can you say that? I mean, we already spilled the beans. We already explained that's because this water is always being supplied with new rainwater. But it says in our Mishnah, you can't water a Beis HaShalchan, even though there will be a Davar Ha'avet, not from rainwater and not from well water. Isn't this rainwater? So Amalei, so he told him, Yirmiyah B'ni, my son, that these types of agomim, these types of ponds in Babylonia, they are constantly being fed with water, like we explained. Again, that's the way he understood Pshat. The issue is whether you'll need a bucket or a pail. And if you have a pond of water that's constantly being replenished, so when you take the water, you don't have to go deep into it. And even after you remove water, new water comes in. That's exactly what he's saying. Here you'll never have tircha yiseva. Weiter. Tanach we learned in the Brais. Watch the cases. Hapsikos v'haberechos. Ditches or pools. It's both the same thing, Ariel. Just ditches is natural. And a pool is people made a pool. It's both. There's a cavity deep in the ground in which water fills in. Water came in there from before. Yamtiv. This is very much in conjunction to what we're learning. They're deep. In other words, how would you get the water out? By using a pail. That's the meaning of excessive exertion. However, but if you have this canal of water that is going in between these ditches or these pools, which means, again, like we just explained, there is a constant inflow of new water inside these pools. So if you were to remove water to water a field, the water that you're removing is going to be from the top. And it's not that now that you remove the top, it's going down. There's constantly new waters coming in. Mutter. Gavaldik, that's already a braisa that is going to be a great siyua to the din that we just learned from Rav Zera. Amar Rav Papa, v'hu sheruba shel oisa soda shoysa ma'oisa masamayim. If the amounts of water that is going through is enough to irrigate at least the majority of the field, then is where you are allowed. But if you don't have that amount of water, so you know what we are afraid? We are afraid, this is psychology. When you are watering a field, so even if you're going to have to now schwitz and get water from far away, when you're into doing something, some people say, let me just do it. And you will end up going far away. Going far away to fetch water, even if it's not from a deep well, is also called excessive exertion. I don't know how you define far away. Now, what's the counter to that? That if there is water that's naturally coming near, the other side will be, it's a psychological question, even if you don't have enough to water the field right now, people won't schlep far away to get water. They're going to say, I watered a little bit today, I'll water a little bit tomorrow, and the day afterwards when the water gets closer. So if people are lazier, so we can say there won't be tircha yisera. For the type of people that are very expedient, then there is a chance there will be a tircha yisera. So that's the machlokes. Rav Ashi says, no, even if this canal that's feeding these pools only are feeding it with a very small amount of water, And therefore, when you are watering your field, you won't have enough water to finish watering, even not the majority of your field. But given the kamashkava asya, since water is slowly coming, so if there isn't enough water today, there will be water tomorrow. Meimar Omer, most people will say, I would rather water my field slowly without having to work, rather than getting it over with and yes, working. And that way of people traveling through the world, this type of how will people react, will determine whether Chazal said you can't do that. It might lead to Tirchei Yeseda, or whether no, since the majority of the people won't exert themselves, so there's no such fear or not enough fear to justify making a gzeira. Right, Tan Rabbanan. Bereicha a pool. Shenetefes mayim misada misadei beis hashalchan zu. That so you have a pool into which water trickles from one irrigation field. So understand, guys, there are two irrigation fields. Think about them. They're on a hill. They are on a hill. The top field has a spring that's feeding the top field, and not to lose the water, so they built the pool in between both fields. All the water that was not used on the top field trickles into this pool. And then it naturally, they built, canals. It flows from the pool to the lower field. That's the case over here. You are allowed to use that on Chalamoid. Isn't it likely that the water will run out? And again, whenever we are afraid that the water will run out, then you will go to a faraway place to finish the job, and that will be Tirchei Yeseda. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, that when did they allow that? When the water is trickling in. In other words, when you own the bottom field and you see water trickling in, you will not go far away. Again, even though it's not enough for right now, since you see the influx of the water, you'll constantly use it. You'll do a little bit today, you'll do a little bit tomorrow. You're not going to end up having this Tirchei Yeseda. Another detail, Amar Abayah, that's also only true if the source of the top field did not stop. If I see water trickling into my field, but I know that the source of the water is no longer there, then I'm going to go schlep far away. But when I know that the Mayan Rishon, the Rebbe is here, we are receiving all of that light, and our job is to pass it on, then people don't go far away. We have all the resources right over here.
Is this a proof to Rabashi that we just...
No, I hear it's different because here you see it dripping. This is psychology. This is human psychology. When you see the source of your water being replenished, even very slowly, you will not go far away. Rabashi's case wasn't that way. Everyone will agree to this. Something similar. You have two beds in a field. Once again, you have a field that's not built on level. So you have a patch or a bed on one level, then you have a patch on a lower level. So he says, never, even when you are allowed to water a field on Cholamoyed, what direction should you go? Down. Because it's easy to walk water down. If the source of water is on the lower patch, don't walk it up. Pashut. Right? I had two friends, had a sled, and they made a partnership, 50-50. You go up, I go down. Up is hard, down is easy. Only bring it down. If it's one bed, but and this is about the levels of incline. Even if the going up is lesser, it's mamish the same bed, it's just a little bit higher, a little bit lower, still. Never go up. That's called Tirchei Yeseda. Okay. Now, here we're quoting a big chiddush. These are the words, madlin. Now, we are beginning with the premise that the words madlin, Rashi says, is about watering vegetables on Cholamoyed. What did we just learn today? Watering meaning you're going to a well and you're schlepping water from a pail. That's called Tirchei Yeseda. So the Mishnah is saying you can't water the field. What about vegetables? You're throwing the water on the vegetables. So it almost sounds like here we allow for you to do it. Or almost the concept here will be, the next couple of lines, is that there are times that even if it's a Tirchei Yeseda, but the need for Yom Tiv, even though it's not public, allows you to do this type of Tirchei Yeseda. So everything becomes very fluid now. Okay, so that's Madlin again, the Havamina, and perhaps it will remain that way in the Maskana. You are allowed to take water in a bucket, in a pail from some deep source of water and throw it on vegetables in order to eat them on Cholamoyed. Okay. The Im Bishvil Liyapoisan says Rashi, Liyapoisan means that the vegetables are fully formed. Throwing water will only make them even better. Mamash, what we learned in the Mishnah, right? Not like Rab Meir. And that means you're not going to lose anything if you won't water them, but you're going to lose the potential additional yipui. Then it's awesome. Okay. Now again, this is a big chiddush because without this brayso, well, basically what we learned is that the moment you have to take water from a well and you have to be madlin, which means you have to draw it up, that's already called tirchi yeseda. And your taka may not do it if it's to water the field, but if you have vegetables and you want to throw the waters on the vegetables, then you can do it. Again, we're gonna define this better soon, but with a story.
Is the yipui to eat it on Cholamayit?
Even though the yipui is to eat it on Cholamayit. Correct.
So what about like Eichel Nefesh? I mean, on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do so many things to eat, and over here you can't even water it to eat it on Cholamayit.
You know what, Tzvika? You probably corrected a mistake that I made. Stamali Apoisin means for after Yom Tov. I think that's the meaning of the.
Yeah, it says here for after the festival.
I must thank you, Tzvika. Good correction. But you know what? If that's the case, I want to add something. If this line, it has to be this way. If the Liapoisin is usher for after, you know what? Even if there's no Tircha Yiseda, you can't do it for after. Remember this. This is correct. So, if anything that you're doing now, any type of work, don't forget, we're beginning with the premise that anything that Shabbos you can't do on Cholamayit unless you have a heter. If it's for after, you have no heter. Again, because it's Liyah Poisin, you're not losing anything. Okay, very good. Now, Ravina, 3 lines from the bottom. The Amoyda Ravina and the Amoyda Rabba Toisva, they were both Havak Azla Be'urcha and Chazal Gavram. They saw a person. He was drawing water from a well, which is exactly what we're speaking about. He was drawing water from a well. Now, without this brayso, it's prohibited. So what do you do? So Rabba, Amalei Rabba Tisval Ravina. We got him, we caught him. Let's put him into a chedim. Amalei, to which Ravina responded, no. There is a time that you could draw water from the well. He quoted our brayso. In other words, why are you choshed b'chedim? Maybe if there is one scenario, right? So you have vegetables and you're throwing the water on the vegetables, they should be eaten on Cholamayit. That justifies the tirchi yeseda. Maybe that's what he's doing. That's all based on the premise that the taich of the brayso is the way we said it. So now they're going to debate the meaning of this brayso. So Amalei. So Rabba Toisva responds back to Ravina, mi savras, that my madlin maya, was verstehst du pshat, that you can draw water from the well. It doesn't fit because the Mishnah says you can't do that. My madlin, I'll tell you what it means. A whole different thing. It means shalufe. Shalufe means to pull out. Let me explain like this. When you have vegetables that are planted together, sometimes there are too many packed in the same place. And they are all drawing nourishment from the same small amount of land. So what you do is you pull some out, you harvest them, and that allows the remaining ones to have more space, and therefore they become a lot better. And that is what the Braisa is allowing you. Now, what's the chiddush here? Because the ones that you are leaving in the ground, Svika, that's for you, is not for now. The ones you are leaving in the ground is it should grow better for after Yom Tov. Why are you allowed to do it? Because you're going to be picking out vegetables right now. Those vegetables you will eat on Cholamayit. Gavalik. And that's the heter of the Brais. Even though your main reason, you don't need these vegetables now. You want for them to grow better. Not for now, for after Yom Tov. So you can't do anything on Cholamayit for after Yom Tov. No, since you're schlepping out these vegetables and they could be eaten up on Cholamayit, that's the meaning of the Brais. Now, where do we find that the words madlin means shalufe? So the Gemara says, I find such a place. It says in the Mishnah and Peya, same word, hameidei b'gefanim, the same concept. You have a vineyard and the vines are packed in very near one to the other. You want to thin it out. You thin it out by cutting out a few vines. So the Mishnah there is actually speaking about the following. In every field, there is a corner of the field that we leave for the poor. So do I have the right to thin out the vineyard in the corner that is basically designated for the poor? I would do it for me. Can I do it for them? Why would I not be allowed to do it? Because I'm pulling some vines out. So machlokes tanoim. But the key is the word medel. Medel bikfanim, when you're thinning out vines by uprooting some of them. So then Tanach holds that kishem shehu medel b'shaloi, just like I do it on my own. Of course, kach medel b'shalanim. Even in that part of the field that really belongs to the poor people, I'm not stealing from the poor people. And by the way, I'm not taking those vines. I'm leaving it for the poor, but maybe the poor would not want. They would want the holach yelech that I do for me, I can do for the poor. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Meir says, no, b'shaloi d'shoy, but you can't do it for the poor. Let the poor people do it on their own. Don't determine for other people what they would like, what they would prefer. More quantity, less quality. Basically, that's what happens. Or maybe less quantity, but better quality. Bottom line is, that's the meaning of the Braisa. So Amalei, so Ravina tells his Chaver Rav Toisva, Nish. No, that's not the meaning of the Braisa, because I know of another Braisa. So Hatanya Madlin Mayin Liyirakas Kadela Achlon. There you go. Very good, Svika. So that's the word. So in other words, what are we learning? We're learning that food, mamish food, there is no problem with Tirchi Yisera. Very good. There is no issue with Tirchi Yisera, and that's the meaning of the Braisa. And therefore, if there is one case from a million cases, most people, they schlep water to water a field. If there is one scenario where you are allowed to draw water on Chol HaMoed, and you see another Jew doing it, we will not assume that he did something wrong. There is one time where it's permitted, we're not going to ban him, because that's how he's doing it to water his vegetables.
Rabbi, would it also be mutter to draw water for human consumption?
Yeah.
And every other, he needs it for his house.
Yes. Well, you should die of thirst, of course. Very good. So Amalei, Rabbi, right? Rabbi Toisva says, Tanya. Okay, I humbly retract. I didn't know the Braisa. Right. We learned in our Mishnah. The ein oisen ugiyois ligefanim. What's ugiyois? What may you not do on Chol HaMoed because it's tirchi? Say to my ugiyois. Amar Rav Yehuda, ugiyois means binkei shkoyach. What does binkei mean? Binkei means ditches that are dug around the roots of the vineyard. Why are you digging these ditches? Because if it's going to rain, you want water to gather there. That's already digging. Here we came with his pictures. Now that is digging. So that's cave on the picture. Wow. So that's a tirchi yisera. So here we go. Tanya namihachi. Tanya namihachi. Afelu henu giyois. What's the meaning of a giyois? Shteit beferish. Bedidin. Here, bedidin means ditches. Shebe ikre zeisim, that you dig around the roots of an olive tree, and shebe ikre gefan. Freaking about any Rav Yehuda, Shara lebnei bar tzisoi. Rav Yehuda allowed for the residents in the village of Bar Tzisoi lemevad binki lekarmeim, to make binki in the vineyards on Chol HaMoed. So if ugiyois is binki, the Mishnah says ugiyois is a no-no. How can he allow it? So the Gemara says like Hashem, that when you're making new ditches, that's tirchi yisera. That's taka word. That's our Mishnah. Rav Yehuda that allowed was ba'atike. There were already ditches. They got filled up with dirt, with rocks. You are only clearing it out. It's not that difficult. Then you are allowed. Next, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Omer ein oisen as ha'ama. Now here again, there's a crossover in our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, I want to touch Amma means a irrigation canal. The Mishnah says you may not dig a new irrigation canal during Chol HaMoed, but then if you look inside the Mishnah, and the Mishnah says nor on Shemitah. Now there's a problem, guys. Working the land like plowing and planting and harvesting, that you can't do. Digging irrigation canal is so far removed. I know it's for water. That's not the Isur of Shemitah. Why would you not be allowed to do it? And B'chlal, there is no concept, Atz Tirchi Yisera. On Shemitah, you can work very hard. It's not Chol HaMoed. So that's going to be the problem we have over here. So the Gemara asks, Bishloima on Moed, which means on Chala Moed, why may you not dig a new irrigation canal? Because the Tanach. That's the whole word. If you won't do it, the produce will die. Tough luck. Financial loss doesn't justify Tircha Yisera. Elo Shvis, my Tama. Tircha Yisera is not problematic during Shemitah. That's it. We got this. So the Gemara gives two reasons. The first wide line. One of them says, because it looks like you're oided. It looks like you are hoeing. Hoeing is prohibited. Hoeing is right around the plant. Because when you dig an irrigation canal, where do you put the earth, Chevra? You put the earth on the side of this canal. So basically you are creating two banks. Those banks have this soft earth that you just dug up. They are so fit for you planting. So it's mamish charisha. Because you are preparing its banks for planting. The third Tosfos says, hold on. So the nidish charisha mamish shesavurim horoyin shalakach mischaven. 1 second, your kavan is not to plant. So it looks like an observable thing. So what? So what? Right? Rab Shimon holds davar she'ei mischaven muter. Answers Tosfos. Right. Everyone agrees, even ultimately Abai and Rava, that Rab Shimon is moed b'psikreisha v'lo yamus. Beautiful. No, I don't care that your intention is just to dig a canal. If you're doing something that is mamish, you prepared that bank for planting, that's a problem. Okay. My benayu, second wide line, Ike benayu, the ka'asa maya basre. If while you are digging this canal, water is flowing as you dig it, hoeing doesn't want water. Hoeing, you don't want water. It doesn't look like hoeing. So if the problem is nira ka'oider, then it's a problem. It's still, you prepared the banks for planting. Because it looks like you are hoeing, that's not a problem. Asks the Gemara, I know that you told me there is a machlokes. I get it. But still, why wouldn't one agree to the other? And I get it that when water is flowing, as you're digging the canal, it doesn't look like you're hoeing. So what? That should be a problem. Alma. And indeed, the Gemara says you're right. Everyone agrees that if you're doing an act which is considered you are preparing the banks for sowing, it is prohibited on the Shemitah. So ikebenayu, the kashakal minei v'shadel lebroi, is that when you're digging the canal, you're not placing the earth on the sides of the canal. You're throwing the earth very far away. You're not creating banks. So Laman, the Amar, the only problem is because here there's no banks. But Laman, the Amar, then we got a problem. And the Gemara now asks the same challenge on the other direction. Why wouldn't everyone subscribe that it's problematic because it looks like hoeing? Ulaman the Amar, the emphasis that nice, but why is that opinion also not concerned? They should be concerned. Answers the Gemara. No, it's like this. One opinion holds that it never looks like hoeing. But the other opinion holds that when does it look like hoeing? Only when you place the earth right on the side, which is what you do when you hoe. You don't throw the earth away. The act of throwing the earth away very far, that makes it even less similar to hoeing, which is why this man, the Amar, won't be concerned with it. Weiter. Ameimar masnila. Ameimar, when he learned our Mishnah, had a version, had a girsa, that when the Mishnah writes that you may not dig a new irrigation canal on Shemitah, so we in the Mishnah, we didn't have a reason. The Gemara is asking why and finding different opinions. Ameimar's version in the Mishnah writes, if those are the words in the Mishnah, now, says the Gemara, we're going to have a problem with Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah and another Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Because this statement, my friend, was made in our Mishnah by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Me, Amar Elazar ben Azariah. It was if this is what's written in the Mishnah. You can't say, no, it's because if Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you may not dig a new irrigation canal on Shemitah because nira ka'oider, I have another Mishnah in Shemitah, it's called Mishnah Shavi'is, Oisa Adam as Zivloi Oitzer, a person is allowed to take all of one's manure or dung and stockpile it on Shemitah. There's a big chiddush. Why is it a big chiddush? Because one may not fertilize a field on Shemitah, right? That's mamash working the land. What happens if your kavana is not to fertilize your field, but you have a dung? It has value. So you're making it into a big stockpile. Now, de facto, is it not fertilizing the land underneath it? That's the issue. So the Tanach says we're not concerned. You can make a stockpile on Shemitah. Rameir Oyser, you have to make it clear that you're not doing it l'shei mitzvahs fertilizing. It's different. You're only storing. How do you do that? Either you dig a ditch that's 3 tefachim deep and you store it in there, or you have a platform made out of stones, made out of wood, and the dung, the lowest level of the dung is already 3 tefachim above the ground. Oishiak bia gimel tefachim. Or, according to Rav Meir, if prior to the Shemitah year, you already had some manure in this location, you fertilized it. Now you're only adding to the pile, then it's not a problem. That's the third solution. Moisev Allah v'hoyach. However, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is a little bit more machmir than Rameir. And he says that even in this case where you already had in this location some manure, you cannot add to it. You got to dig or build a platform. Or put it on a stone. Find a place in your field that the earth is so hard, no one plants there. No one is going to think that you are fertilizing. Now, it's amazing, the Chachmei. So what is the Gemara's problem? The Gemara's problem is that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gives as one of the solutions to dig a ditch 3 tefachim deep. 1 second. Digging a ditch 3 tefachim deep looks like hoeing. So you resolved the fertilizing. It's not fertilizing because you're putting it deep in the ground. But according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the digging is a problem. So Rab Zeira and Rab Abba bar Mamol, they both gave each 2 different answers. One said, Chad, that what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah means, you are only allowed to stockpile manure if before the Shemitah year there was a hole there. There was already a ditch in the ground. Not that you dig it on Shemitah. The Chad Amar, the other one holds that even though Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that digging an irrigation canal is also on Shemitah because it looks like you're hoeing, that's only when you're digging an irrigation canal and you're doing nothing right now. You're just digging a ditch, a canal. But when you are digging a hole and you are right away placing it in manure, that clarifies that you are not hoeing. You do action A, and right afterwards you do action B. Action B is megala what action A is. Zibloi merchiach chalav, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah will hold it's not problematic. Weiter. It's easy.
Rabbi,
yes.
Why can't you just post a sign saying, "I'm digging an irrigation canal. I'm not hoeing"? I mean, for God's sake.
A person should order a chazer that comes with the apple in the mouth and put up a sign, I only want the apple. I only want the apple. No, you don't do that. Doesn't always help. Okay. The Mishnah says, going back to Chalamoid, that you are allowed to repair a damaged irrigation canal on Chalamoid. So what is the definition of damaged and how much can you dig? How much can you work? So the guys who's at David asked yesterday, the reason why a canal is called an amma, guys, an amma 6 tefachim, because the norm of making these water canals was they would dig it 6 tefachim deep, be 6 by 6. So fixing means it was already pre-dug, but it got filled up, and now you have to remove the earth. So says Rab Abba, she'im hoisa amuka tefach, it originally was 6 tefachim deep, and it got so clogged that right now it's only 1 tefach deep. That's a lot of work, guys. Still okay. That mamida al shisha tefachim. Wow. Or you would say, come on, it's almost fully closed up. Doesn't matter. Since it was already dug in the past and it's already open 1 tefach, you can add 5 tefachim. Now, guys, let's give scenarios where you have proportionally the identical amount of work, proportionally. So says the Gemara, Shita. The next statement is a given. If you only have now a half a tefach, and the question is, can I go to 3 tefachim deep on Chalamoyed al Shloisha tefachim? Now, guys, you chap what's going on over here? From a half a tefach to 3 tefachim, Ariel, proportionally is just like from 1 tefach to 6 tefachim, which we are allowed. An amma 6 tefachim. So one would say, yes, you could. If you are allowed to take a ditch, a canal, that's right now only 1 tefach deep, and go to 6, then you should be allowed to go to a canal that's right now a half a tefach and go to 3. You can't. Why can't you? Until now, we were speaking about excessive exertion. This is not excessive. This is less, or at least equal. But the tircha has to be for a purpose. Canals only function properly if they are 6 tefachim deep. If it's only 3 tefachim deep, it didn't serve the proper purpose of transporting the water from point A to point B. So that's called it's called an exertion that's not necessary. It's purposeless. So you may not do that, even though it's relatively not a lot of work. So if you have a half a tefach and you want to dig it to 3 tefachim, kiven deloy avar mayom, since the water that goes through is not significant, that's called the tircha deloy l'tzoyrach. If you remember, we learned this dinim when we learned Hilchos Shabbos, Hilchos Yom Tov. Tircha deloy l'tzoyrach, even if it's not a big exertion, is not allowed. Loy klumu, and therefore it's asur. Let me go in the reverse. Also, proportionally the same. If it's already 2 tefachim deep, you're going proportionally, like you're going from 1 to 6, you're going from 2 to 12. Al shnei masar, that's problematic. The katarach tircha yisera. In other words, you may not dig more than 5 tefachim. If that's the case, so now the kasha will be, my friends, if you have a canal that's 2 tefachim deep, you are telling me that you can go up until 5 tefachim. It's not called excessive. Can you go from 2 to 7? You get the gavaldik. Why not? Because canals were normally 6. The added one is not needed. I get it that it's not tircha yisera, but there's a loylet soyrech aspect. That's the boya. If it's tefachayim and you want to dig al shiva mahu, do we say on one side, on one hand, here you only added 5 from 1 to 6, which you could. From 2 to 7, you're only adding 5, and therefore it should be permitted. Or I Dilma, no, even the ikadevach yisera, you're going into 7. You don't need 7. You only need 6. So that's called right. It's added work, maybe added because you're going deeper, like we began the whole thing about the pail, because you have to schlep the dirt up, not from the 6th tefach, from the 7th tefach. So there is an added tircham, and maybe it should be asur, and that question stands. Weiter. A few more lines. Abaya shara libnei bar hamdach. Abaya allowed for the residents of bar hamdach l'shachufei nahara, to dig away. They had a source of a river. The source of the river became clogged, and on Chalamoyed he allowed for them to unclog it. Similarly, Rav Yirmiyah shara lahu livnei sachusa. He allowed the residents of this village of Sachusa lemichra nara tamima. Again, to clear out a source of water. So there was branches in one river, there was earth in the other river. A third case, Rav Ashi, Sharalahu lebnei Masa Machasya, he allowed for the residents of Masa Machasya, la'agduchei nahar burmitz, that there was sand that piled up in the middle of a river. Clear away the sand. Now, all of these activities demand a lot of work. However, the water is being used not only to irrigate fields, people also drink from it. And not one yachid. The rabbim, so kerabim dami. And as we learned in the Mishnah, that oris oisin call sarchei rabbim. Okay, now just to speak out, first of all, to this point, I'm just curious, and if it wouldn't be Tuat Rabbim, then you see over here that there's a limit even for drinking water, how much can you work? But I understand because there is water. It wasn't clogged dry. There was a lack of water. You want to make it more plentiful since it's to service the city. That's why when it comes to Tzarchei Rabbim, we have no problem with Tircha Yisera, and the spiritual significance is so beautiful. There was a story that the Rebbe sent a sofer to Chicago, and he was making a fundraiser, and it was in a home of a person that wasn't B'chal observant yet, and he wanted to understand the meaning of a scribe. And so he says that every Jew is like a letter in the Sefer Torah, And when you go and you fix the letters, sometimes the letter, the ink gets a little bit dulled. And a sofer sharpens, beautifies it. He was saying, that's the Hasidic farbrengen. You wanna paint up the Jewish letters. And when the Rebbe heard that metaphor, he says that's beautiful, but he would like to make a correction that a Jew is not like a letter in the scroll. A Jew is like a letter in the 10 Commandments. We are engraved because the engraved letter doesn't even get dull. All that might happen is that dust might go into it and it might get clogged up. And all you need to do is you have to unclog it. And the unclogging it is exactly what we're learning over here. That's a good Hasidic farbrengen. Chavre, God willing, to be continued.
I'd like to ask a quick rabbi question. If a Kohen has a firstborn male son, there's no opinion of Ben, is there?
No,
there's not.
No, and not only that, Baruch, I want to add a nuance that even if the mother is from a family of a Kohen, even if the mother is from a family of a Levi, the father is an Israelite, the baby is an Israelite, there's no pidyon haben. Now, that's not in all cases. There are other gifts that have to be given to Kohanim that the Kohen also has to give. But very good. Not by the pidyon haben.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.